Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the No Small Stories podcast. This episode, Shane and I will be talking to our fellow writer and author, Shawn L. Koch. Shawn has a new book, Unjudgeable, that is available now, and you can find the link in the description. Do enjoy this conversation we have with him about writing and creativity and how do you cater to the masses when you still want to create the things that you love. So I hope you enjoy this conversation that Shane and I have with author Shawn Koch. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of No Small Stories. I'm here with Shane, my co-host, and our guest today is Shawn Koch, who is a fellow writer. And Shawn, if you would like to give us just a little intro to you and what is your writing, I guess, style, I would ask. Like what is it that you write? Tell us about your writing.
Vibe atmosphere do you produce, good sir?
Yes.
I like weird stuff because I find the mainstream is just far too boring and normal and just tepid milk.
I agree.
So I fell in love with about a decade ago the Bizarro movement, which is like that little shelf on the VHS back when VHS was a thing. There was all the stuff that didn't fit in other categories, and they didn't know where to put it. You know, import, artistical, experimentals type of stuff.
Very sort of Eraserhead. Who am I thinking of? Who's that director?
David Lynch.
David Lynch, yeah, very out there and kind of maybe tweaking people's brains just a little bit.
Oh yes, and it falls into surrealist, magical realism, gonzo, bizarro. Is wide category of the strange and unusual. Doesn't fit into anything else. So that's what attracted me the most. But I grew up reading those, 300-page sci-fi horror fantasy books that used to come out in the 80s and 90s. And then when I hit the bizarro market, everybody's like, "Oh, we don't do that. We only do novellas for, whatever pop culture thing is going on right now." So I'm torn between that, micro fiction progression that people are trying to do with fiction right now and old 500,000-600,000 page books back in the 80s.
That's kind of, as much as things like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings and things like that have been, popular sort of in the last decade or so. They're definitely, I think, with probably social media a little bit, there's a big shift into more short stories. People definitely don't have quite the same attention span that they used to, right? So,
That's certain.
yeah, that is true. I mean, you don't necessarily have, don't always have quite the market for the longer novel type writing that used to be.
Right.
So, if you could maybe give us, so like some of the things that we talk about is a little bit where the writing comes from, right? So you have your inspirations for that, but in terms of like your own stories, where would you say some of that comes from for you, or what inspires you when you are creating your stories?
Well, when I was a young warthog, I consumed a vast material of comic books, video games, movies, lots and lots of movies, just anything you get your hands on, and weird subjective, or not subjective, what's the word, speculative fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, very off the wall stories that weren't just generic fiction. And I love imagination. I love creativity. I don't consider myself a writer because writers have to learn English and be good at it. And I consider myself a storyteller, which is why I
like it.
Like role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, but also comic books, music, anything you get your hands on and mess with is a creative atmosphere. It's artistic. It's all art, and you're expressing yourself in a way. And so when I was a very young child, I came across, young child, I think is a misnomer there, about 11 or so. So that's what, junior high?
It gets to be younger and younger as the years go on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah.
The further away you get from it, the younger you think it is.
Yeah.
There's a book called Operation Chaos. I have it on my shelf. I can't remember the author, but it was about a witch and a werewolf have to ride a magic carpet to fight Nazis, and the devil hates them, so it abducts their child, and they have to go into hell and rescue their child. And I was like, 10, 11, and this was far outside the concepts of what fiction
I was
was.
gonna say that's already a heck of a premise right there. I am not familiar with it myself,
Yeah, right.
but that's a lot of different elements as far as supernatural and magical and a little bit of religion in there. So definitely kind of an amalgamation of a lot of different concepts.
The author was Paul Anderson, by the way. It was known as a
Okay.
sci-fi writer.
Okay.
But
Wait.
yeah, that and Dragon on a Pedestal by Piers Anthony, and that convinced me I needed to write for a living. That was what I wanted to do since 1991 or 92.
I love it. That's it's kind of funny. I when I was younger and I was writing, it was kind of more, and Shane and I sort of talked about this. It was more of a therapeutic sort of thing, more of kind of
Mhm.
expressing emotions, trying to get out some of that teen angst, trying to sort of do some self analysis. But definitely where I am currently in my writing, it's definitely the imagination, definitely the sort of amuse thyself first kind of principle. If I think it's fun, if I think it's enjoyable, then I'll write it and I'll create a story because it's something fun for me. Um, so I do love that kind of angle, but just that it's, wanting to do it for the fun of it, wanting to do it for purely for the creation of it. I do love that. Do you find any of that to be therapeutic to you though, in a sense? Do you find that that self-expression as being something that is an outlet to some extent?
Oh,
uh
certainly. Oh,
mhm.
certainly. Because you got to understand, a lot of characters are really just reenacting your own traumas. You take all your baggage and you just pour it in the stories, and then they suffer it, and you don't, and it's a
you
relieving process.
and you don't. And now how much do you really believe in that part of it that you don't if you just
Yeah,
give
right.
it away to your characters?
Well, to be honest, I went through a period of Zen Buddhism where I came to terms, and a lot of psychedelics, but I don't need to get into that. But it was able to empty out the closet, so to speak, and my issues really have been cleansed from my internal systems. Right now, every issue I have is money, which economically, not a good
Yeah,
situation.
that's small potatoes, right? No big deal.
Yeah, like right. We haven't been able to do laundry in the last 2 weeks just because bills piled up. Food is getting more expensive, and it's just the frustrating banalities of the small tasks of domestic life have consumed me. And I don't worry about the emotional stuff anymore, the traumas. I mean, I'm 40, so I'm well past the development stage of the 20s and 30s where you exercise your demons. However, I will say that in my writing, I think a lot of the writing has come down now to dad jokes. I come up with a ridiculous pun, and then I go to extreme lengths to figure out how to turn that into a story.
I like it. Use that dad humor. No,
Yeah.
and I think. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, I just wondering if you ever thought
Go,
about
son.
writing just like comic strips as just either sort of a way to, some self-expression, but also a way to get kind of some of your stuff out there in smaller packages until it kind of sticks somewhere if that worked. Because I would love that. I would love reading. We've had kind of the same comic strips for like 50 years, and it'd be nice to see something better, digestible in a, I don't know, in a more quality aspect. So
No, that's definitely true. I mean, you've seen the same comic strips for since I was a kid, at least, and long before that. So, maybe that certainly there would be a space and an audience for you, I'm sure, in terms of having something that's a little bit more out there, a little bit more zany, and definitely, who doesn't love dad humor? I think we all appreciate dad humor, right?
right, yeah.
So in 2016, I got picked up by Eraserhead Press, which is a small group out of Portland, Oregon, and I put out a bizarro novel called Crime of the Scene, which I don't want to get into the things going on at the time, the atmosphere, the politics, et cetera, but for some reason my book vanished and disappeared. They never gave me any money out of it. They never gave me any reason why the book vanished off the market. But the book was about a detective goes to a scene of a crime, and inside that scene is another scene of another crime, and he digs into deeper and deeper the crimes of history and humanity and metaphysics and all the crimes of humanity itself. So it goes through every crime imaginable in history and digging into the root of what makes us as people.
That's very interesting, kind of a exploration of human consciousness, and to a certain extent via true crime, or well, not true crime necessarily, but that sort of that vein of that genre, I guess you would say. There
was a lot of Terrence McKenna involved in writing that book.
That's all right. So that is something that we certainly understand as writers, trying to get your stuff out there, trying to find a way to how do you get this whole creative life to be something you can do full time and still support yourself. And certainly that is a challenge I think that we're all facing. But I do think that this kind of conversation and having these conversations with other creatives, it is something that can be very helpful, very useful in terms of even just idea brainstorming, like Shane having the idea of a comic strip sort of idea, and sort of how do you again, people's attention spans are different now than they used to be, and certainly I think that if there was a way for you to like put something like that together and maybe just have even a Patreon page where you just post your comics, a couple of them a week, just little short things. I just, I'm so in a space of trying to be positive in terms of like, there has to be a way. There's an audience out there for everyone. Right. And certainly for the more sort of zany, out there kind of things, I think that there's more of an appetite for that now than maybe
I want to believe.
Yeah. Well, and talking to other artists too, it's nice to have this conversation of what what we feel as artists that we need in in our lives, and what's what other people need, and what's lacking, maybe even in society is kind of nice to have that conversation. So I guess that's a question too, Shawn. So yeah, I mean, just in your writing, I mean, I think all writers a little bit have something where it's like, okay, I'm adding to the the collection, the atmosphere of everything, right? And we talk about saturation and how sometimes bad it is, sometimes how great it is, right? You can find everything and everything is available, but right, it makes it a bit overwhelming. So when you bring something to the table, you always kind of want it to be, okay, something, all right, I'm giving back something. We kind of talked about that in the last podcast, where it's like you bring something at least new or valuable, at least whether it's in your life or somebody else's, that could be relatable. So I guess that's a question. It's like, what do you think people need to read? Like, and how it relates to what you write, or how it relates to the stories that you make?
That's a good, fine question. Analysis paralysis has completely destabilized, because the market of available things digitally means that there's too much to choose from. So you look for stuff that is not just the same thing being repeated over and over again, stuff that's unique or flavorful or atmosphere, or comes along with an artist's touch that makes it something that other people are not doing. Most of the big names, especially in film, are people who have a very specific visual style that sells the story to people. Mm-hmm. I don't know what I would consider my touch is usually a combination of horror and comedy. Mm-hmm. And so I mix up things like, no, I don't want to say highbrow. Highbrow is horrible to use as a word. David Foster Wallace type books, where it's just massive tomes of these giant stories, but then toned down to like B films and splatter stuff, and very sensationalized sort of not grindhouse, was this exploitation films of the 70s, mixing these different parts of culture and media together in this what's it called when you mix a bunch of collage?
Yeah.
collage of what are the various parts, because I put in storytelling stuff that's very lowbrow humor, very, like stupid and silly, but also stuff that's very intellectual and very at a high degree, and then blend them together in a way that is encompassing the experience of people experiencing what is life at a base level. Biologically, we experience very banal stuff. Everybody goes to the bathroom,
Yeah.
but then you mix in like, well, what about multi-theory, dimensional, illusion, simulation, all that kind of big theory stuff that's hit the mainstream lately. And you blend those two together. So you keep it human, but you also explore realms that are higher up.
Gotcha.
I don't know. That sounds like a politician answer. I didn't actually give an answer there.
No, I think that's like awesome. I think, I mean, you have that disruption factor that I think is sort of naturally present in like human experience anyway. I always think of horror films anyway, where it's basically like, like 40% like porn, on some, and then like another good percentage of, whether you got the slasher, whether it's a thriller or whatever else. Yes, some comedy, but it all rolls into basically human experience, because you can't be serious all the time. You can't be, humor all the time. You can't laugh all the time. There's this up and down even within a given, minute. One of the books I recently read a couple months ago was All Quiet on the Western Front, and that's about World War One, and
fantastic.
That book is one of my favorite books. Yep.
Yeah. And it's so it's a similar experience where it's it's essentially, okay, these dudes are at war, so you have the overarching what what good is war, and why people are fighting it in the first place and all this stuff, right? But then you have actually the people that are doing the fighting, the soldiers, whatever, and they've got to go back to the front line in like 5 minutes, right? But they all are at the latrine, like taking a shit, like trying to like figure out how to like connect to each other and sort of like calm down, like before they have to
go back out into the shit in the realness.
Like,
yeah,
they're trying to find their humanity for like a split second before they have to go and like murder somebody else, and it's just it's a crazy experiment, and trying to dig into all of that is a very cool thing you're doing. So
I do like that too, the idea of incorporating ideas of the multiverse. Obviously, that's something that I do in my writing. I know that you've listened to my podcast, and my fictional podcast, and I really do love the idea of sort of being a part of that shift in human consciousness. I think to some degree, going from like where we have been, maybe in All Quiet on the Western Front, the war, the really sort of base level primitive sort of instincts of humanity, and really sort of trying to shift out of that kind of, even though that's fiction, shifting out of that space where we have been as humanity and into a space of looking at possibilities, looking at the multiverse, the idea of there being other dimensions, the idea of there being parallel realities, and playing with imagination, playing with what could we really create as humans if we got ourselves out of those trenches, right? Of all the banal human things, of all the fighting over resources and being so concerned and so consumed by the material needs, right, of a human that we have. If we had the ability to get out of that survival mode space, right, what could you really create? And exploring that in imagination, and exploring the bigger possibilities that there are outside of this, again, sort of human survival mode that I think that a lot of us are trying to find our way out of, especially as creatives. But I do think that is something really great to offer in terms of, again, like Shane said, adding value. And that's something that I do think does add value as a creative, as a writer. It's something that you offer up as perspective, as, okay, fine, here's horror, and here's this, kind of element of human experience of the fearful nature that we as humans are kind of ingrained and encouched in fear, right? but then here's maybe something that's a little bit more fun. Here's something comedic. Here's some relief in that space that can be added, and can you use that relief as a bridge into, again, these other more broad sort of expansive ideas. So I do love that. I think that that's really great. As a fellow writer and creative, I do love exploring that space.
Yeah, I just talked with a friend the other day, and I told him he's a big horror film guy, loves them, and so we just kind of got started talking on some of the recent horror films that we liked, and had some disagreements or whatever else. It's hard for me to like find a good like scary movie nowadays. I'm always mining all the streaming services, and I'm almost always disappointed. So, but we were talking about the first time that I realized soundtrack dissonance was with a movie that I saw probably about 6 months ago. And I'm like, this is deliberate, right? This is a deliberate effect that is going on right now. This is happy music during a very violent or, disturbing scene. I'm like, okay, this has to be done on purpose. What is this called? And so I, researched it. And yeah, it's a similar thing. It's coupling all these different emotions because you don't have them in a vacuum, right? You have them, one thing triggers another, right? And I don't know, just enveloping all of that is a super cool idea. I did have a question for you, Shawn, too. When it comes to, I grew up with siblings that read Lord of the Rings, that read these kind of big epics, these big books, long works of fantasy and fiction and sci-fi too. But I've noticed that a lot of people sometimes, because they are so used to being grounded in sort of a realistic background or setting, whether that's history or not, but like a physical place, a real place that they can ground the story. Sometimes going into a story, especially a larger piece of work, with a realm or a setting that's completely fantastical or made up or fiction, becomes exhausting, because now it's not only the story that they have to imagine throughout the throughout the telling of it, it's the entire universe, it's the entire background that they kind of have to like keep together. So for those people that are obviously wanting to broaden their expanse in reading, but do feel intimidated or do feel exhausted sometimes by these types of stories, what's something that they could kind of dip in or maybe try to keep in mind as they're kind of getting into that stuff? Because I think that's part of it, right? It's also while we're conceding that people need to read these kind of stories or whatever else, right, we also have to kind of sort of give them kind of a a helpline as well to pull them in, because some aren't going to be ready for it.
Well, let me put on my professor glasses. The introductory of a person to a narrative first is driven by character, because people can relate to people. This person has needs, desires, wants. So you lead with the character, and through the character's perception of their world, what they accept as normal. There's a lot of big tentpole enterprises, I would use the word, like Harry Potter, for example, not that far off from reality, but everything in this world has to be introduced to young children at a step-by-step tutorial. So they take them through the world. This is what this is what that is. And they introduce it in very slow increments to, by the time you get to the 4th or 5th book, you've already established this linguistic narrative of things that aren't part of our world, but are now just naturally part of the world that you're used to reading the story. And I think, as much as I disagree with a lot of the flack that surrounds Harry Potter and all the nonsense that the creator is up to, the reality is that was a successful story for a reason. It was built, all those books were built in a way where you introduce people to a magic world in a way that they can comprehend, which is bite size by bite size, in a way that fits the character's narrative arc and what's important to them. You're dealing, of course, with school children, so what's important to them is just going to class and dealing with other kids. But others, like writers in these kind of giant, massive, otherworldly storytellings, Narnia or the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, I don't I don't know if I would count, because he's a professor who's just going to introduce you to a completely alien world. He just
Right.
built like Elvish languages, and he's just like, let me write a story around that. And
Yeah.
because his love was linguistics. I love linguistics
Yes.
too, but
Yeah.
it's not going to introduce most people easily into a world visually. In like film and stuff, you have the alleviating expressions of imagery to coax people into a reality that they don't quite
Sure.
recognize as our reality. And so that you could just drop people in the deep end, some
Mhm.
weird surreal film that doesn't make sense, but you love what's going on in it. With writing, you're stuck to the elements of the word choices and how those are introduced and expressed to the reader. But again, the driver of the story is people wanting things and going to do those things. And as long as the people are driven by the basic things that we're driven as,
Mhm.
food, hunger, shelter, etc., and then up of that, art, learning, joy, happiness, all those various I'm really kidding. What's the freaking, I'm gonna
The
sputter, my brain's just gonna sputter here.
Oh no, that's all right.
Pavlovian responses to our
Mm-hmm.
basic instinctual needs, then yes, you drive them through those very human, intimate, I don't want to, primitives got too much flack for it as a word, visceral human experience. And then you slowly spoon feed the elements until you've established a world that they're already wrapped up in.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I think, yeah, character forward is the most important, especially for me, like when I think about just like the suspension of, belief.
Right.
Whenever you read a book, right, you're okay, so I'm dedicating myself to like whatever's in this book, this world, whatever. I'm suspending all the outside to dedicate whatever this book is about. But and Harry Potter, granted, was probably tailored and put more forward for kids and teens and whatever. And I have to I guess I just have to acknowledge that some books, either being adult or otherwise, are not gonna make it easy for me, or not gonna make it easy for the reader. Sometimes I think of like Kurt Vonnegut, and while I love his stories and his writing is cool, um, when I start each book, I'm trying to make connections and associations to like outside of the book, and like a lot of times I'm just like, okay, I can't. I just have to like follow like what's in the book and just try to like parcel it together, within that. Um, and that's a good way to look at it, though, is just kind of follow the character, knowing, getting in touch with the character, and knowing what the character needs and where they're going, and the rest will kind of fall into place. Or setting is, it's great, but it is secondary, right, to really what the character is doing in the story. Anyway, you can still get a bulk, value and quality out of the story if you just follow the character, even if you don't even know what the setting is.
So next month, I am tracked to release my next book. Problem is, I don't have any real community or base or following. I don't know how to sell. I don't know how to advertise. So it's trying to get some sort of success out of the work. But the work is called Unjudgeable, and it takes place. It doesn't state a time, but theoretically about the year 3000, after the final war has destroyed the planet, and the only remaining civilization is Walled Streets, which is the Walmart family takes everybody in and makes them basically serfs in a sort of what's not serfdom, feudal sort of servitude, where the masses serve the rich people floating in their little sky yachts above the city. And they don't know what's in the old world because everything's been forgotten and lost. So they take a group of archaeologists, although they're not called archaeologists, they're called fanthropologists because they're fanboy anthropologists, and they send them across the ocean into the remains of the old world to look for remnants that will tell them the history of what happened that caused the final war. So they're going on this voyage to what they believe was the Kardashian Empire's embassy, called the Kmart, where the Kardashians took over and served all their products to people. And they have to travel through the wasteland with these tracking guides, that goes through the territory of the tribal primitive cults of the Juggalos, whose carnival of mad clowns throwing hatchets and going whoop whoop chases them.
I love this already. Just the number of pop culture things that you have
Right.
been able to incorporate into the
and it
very
is
real
built
sort of
on
hierarchy that we experience currently economically.
Uh-huh.
it's built on misunderstanding. Everything is like anybody one of us would go, no, that's wrong. Like what? Like they find ramen and they're like, oh, early primitive cultures built their trade off of trading ramen to each other. They built their houses out of it. That's how they censored in the masses and turned them into servitude. Is they ate ramen packets and then so they go through that. They go through a territory of the furries, which are the descendants of people who worship the furry culture and now just live in their fursuits and like stitch talons into their hands. It's
love it.
horrible and it's brutal and it's gory and it's nasty. And they get to they're led and saved by, at some point the magic or technology had released television into reality, and a famous television judge walks out and is basically Clint Eastwood. It's got a doily around. She's got a doily around her neck, and she's like, "Don't pee on my leg and call it raining." And yeah, I can't say the name for legal reasons, but the lady
Sure.
in black robes with her two pistols shows up and murders everything, and then has speed loaders on her belt and is smoking a fat cigar. And she's like, "Oh, fine, I'll lead you stupid kids across the wasteland." She takes them to Kmart, where they find the most complicated pun joke I've ever created, in which the Nazi offshoot goes into the Anasazi and the Anazi and becomes the Nazis, and are basically a feminist cult of spider children who, by the time they turn and hit puberty, all these girls just basically turn into spiders and like mandibles break through their skin. And
I love it. This is wild. Listen, you need to have a following because someone would absolutely make this into like the most insane animated Rick and Morty movie.
Yeah, right.
It would be fantastic.
So then that leads so the Kmart is run by those people, and they find magazines, and they're like, US people, Time, all those like the trashy garbage stuff you find on the grocery store stands.
Yeah.
And these anthropologists are like, oh, these are classic relics of the historians who tell us about the great Bieber and his believer cult of, and there's believer nuns show up, and they have crucifix chainsaws with like Justin Bieber crucified on them, and they're going baby 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 oh as they slash through people with their giant chainsaws.
I can see this film happening already.
Right?
I love this.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's very much in tune with the 90s like action adventure, like Escape from New York sort of. You have to travel through a dangerous place and there's like over the top violence and action, and the heroes make it out the other side. But it is an absurdly, I don't want to say splatterpunk because it's not grotesque in the descriptions of how it attaches to the blood and gore and visceral remnants of what goes on. But it is definitely an adult book. It is definitely absurd, and it misunderstands everything about our culture, because I think that when we are gone 1,000 years from now, what is seen is going to be viewed in a very different way than we know it by whatever culture discovers it.
Right. That's very true. And it's kind of interesting to think a little bit about, okay, how do we as current society look upon our own archaeology and the things that we've done up, looking at, even, the pyramids in Egypt, for example, how outrageously are we misinterpreting things? And isn't it interesting? I do love this idea because obviously these people that you have going through this story very much believe that they are correct in their interpretations, right? Because everything is from their own personal frame of reference, and they think that that's enough to extrapolate and get a correct sense of what they're looking at. And as we are the ones, currently who know what Newsweek is, who know who the Kardashians are, and who have an understanding of it, it seems outrageous and ridiculous. But doesn't that open up your mind a little bit? Again, in the sense of adding value to society through your writing, and even as outrageous as it might be, doesn't that give you such a open your mind to the idea that, well, we might be just as outrageously wrong about our own human past and our own human history, that we look at through the lens of archaeology, through the lens of what, these theories that these scientists give us. Could we potentially be grossly inaccurate about what it is that we're looking at, and in terms of how those people did actually view their own reality in terms of what it actually meant to them? Like, that's a fascinating idea to me. I really love it.
That's what we don't understand about like Greeks, is that they lived that wasn't mythology to them. They saw that as everyday life. But I took a college course in anthropology and fell in love with it, linguistical anthropology specifically. But the idea of how we view the past and how we understand cultures is a fascinating concept. And for about a decade, I worked in television, and I was bombarded by ads and pop culture and behind the scenes TV and lots of a specific television judges show.
Oh, really? Very interesting. And I think that we've talked about that a little bit before, Shawn, you and I, the idea of, like you said, it's called programming for a reason with TV, and things are made to be, those jingles are made to be catchy and stick in your head. It's made to be something that is ingrained in you. And I think,
as Blues Traveler said, the hook brings you back.
That's absolutely correct. Yes. And it's that what is that? It's like a 3-chord thing that comes from Pachelbel's canon, and there's so many songs. Yeah.
By the something Axis of Awesome or whatever. It's a band where they do the 3-chord progression song, and they show you how every song is just the same exact 3-chord progression.
Right. Just and yeah. But I do, again, it's as much as I understand that what they're doing is showing like sort of the lack of creativity in the way that things sort of follow that same progression, I like to look at it as, well, isn't that kind of amazing, the way that humans can take something that is one thing and extrapolate it out into so many different things, and be so creative in the way that they change it just enough to make it something their own and make it something different, right? And again, from the perspective of us as artists, like, that has to be something that is a little bit of a glimmer of hope, I guess you would say, that as much as anything that you might write about, as much as anything that you do may have a similar flavor to this, that, or the other thing, you talk about saturations of the market, as much as that might be something that is true, there is also that element of, even if we all have the same base 3 chords, you can make so much from it that can be so uniquely yours, that can so uniquely touch other people and reach other people and build an audience, and that there is that space for you, whatever is your particular flavor. There is an audience out there for you. There has to be, right? And so I do love that kind of, say what?
One can hope.
Yeah.
No, I do. I do believe that. I do. I mean, listen, there's billions of people on this planet. There's no possible way that there's not at least a few thousand, 100,000 really, that would be interested in your work and interested in what you do, and find a chord that they can resonate with in what you do.
One of 3 chords, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. In a very specific progression.
Yeah.
I love it.
The tools long ago discovered of what impacts people the most. What's I call the lizard reptilian brain, is that there are things in storytelling and things in music and stuff that are very impactful to people. And Hollywood well knows how to use those tools to draw people in. I mean, they are just pumping out endless stuff to hit their quotas or their budgets, and I think the whole Hollywood scheme's a money laundering scam. But the point is that they're using these proven techniques that psychologists have developed in labs, that people have tested over years, but they're not telling interesting stories with them, because at the heart you still have to approach what is the human condition, why we do certain things, the things we want, and tell those stories. But they're on this like my publisher, by the way, is he was one of those Occupy Vegas guys. So he's just, like, oh, it's the capitalist system and we need to be down with get rid of the bourgeois, and we need to bring anarchy to the masses. And like when we produce the book and we're going to sell it, I'm like, well, we have to do advertising. We have to get this out there. We have to get people interested in the product, because all you need is like 1 million people to give you $1 and you're a millionaire. That's all we need. Exposure, we need to hit the markets. And he's like, no, it needs to be like those avant-garde underground things. We just release it, hope people find it, and only the cool kids will find it. And I'm like, that's not a business strategy.
No.
You're burying my book before it gets out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's not a businessman. He's really great with very out there psychedelic type of stuff, and editing and doing the English part of it and making the book look nice and getting great art for us and stuff. He just doesn't have the ability to move the books because he believes the capitalist system is against the man, or is the man against us.
I think like it's kind of one of those things, though. You kind of have to draw the elements that you need. So if he's helpful in actually getting the book created itself, then good deal, and continue to allow whatever opportunities come to find a way to get it out there. I do like that concept. We'll do our best for you. I mean, we're going to put the podcast out, and we'll absolutely share all your links where you have so do send that all to me, your Amazon links and all that, so that we can share where your book's going to be posted and where people can get it. Definitely part of what we want to do in terms of adding value to this creative community is to be able to help people have an outlet to get your information out there somehow, some way. But I do really love going back to what you were saying about Hollywood and how there is a very specific formula. And it is based on psychology. It is based on what does work. As much as I think that is true, and it kind of to tie in, Shane and I had a conversation about AI and ChatGPT. At some point, the algorithm doesn't function enough. At some point, the proven formula that you continuously use over and over is not enough for an audience. It's not enough for people anymore. And I do think that is a space that we're in right now, that people are looking for something more genuine, something with more human passion and feeling and creativity put into it. That is an element that is missing to a great degree from the mainstream entertainment that we have. And so as much as, sure, you might be avant-garde, you might be something that previously would have been considered the things that you might find underground and only so many people would know about. I do think, again, that there is such a space now where people are looking for that. People are seeking that out because they are tired of the algorithm. They are tired of being told what they're supposed to like, and they're tired of being told that, this is the film formula and the characters you're supposed to like, and this is who you're supposed to root for, or what have you. I think that there are more people looking a bit for that juxtaposition kind of thing, the seeing a horrific scene with the happy music behind it, maybe not necessarily that specific thing, but something different, something more in connection to the human experience, something that that really reaches and connects with people in a way that the overarching sort of algorithmic, formulaic sort of creativity just does not strike a chord with people in the same way. Like, yeah, you can certainly create a soundtrack that is meant to, get you excited at the right moments, make you fearful in the right moments, make you experience the emotions that are useful to the franchise, so to say, right? But there the element of true human experience, the element of true human creativity and passion and uniqueness is missing from that. So I do think that as much as it might not, it might seem like something that is in the underground type space, but I do think that there's absolutely room for it to come out into the light, because I think people are looking for it.
Yeah, that's true. Also, people just want to have fun. And you always got to keep that in mind, that as heady and as experimental and strange, you also have to make something that's entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. We do need that. We do need some release and escape. And the longer that I stay, like, in the entrepreneurial mindset sort of thing, I always used to think that marketing and selling was like, bad and superficial and, capitalist, pig. And while, capitalism is its own discussion, right? On as a whole, not necessarily a bad thing, but obviously any unregulated system to a point is terrible, right? Like I believe capitalism can work, but it does need a cap, right? At some
Mhm.
point, billionaires and high millionaires and whatever else should be giving back to the society that they're profiting from. I think that just makes sense. But the more that I kind of dig into what it is to be, an entrepreneur or whatever else, right? It's been brought to my attention the idea of like what selling is, and that we are constantly selling ourselves anyway. Like we are putting out personas, we're putting things that we want people either to agree with or that we want community with or whatever else. And there's this book that I've been meaning to read, but it's called To Sell as Human by Daniel Pink. And it looks like a really interesting book, but essentially it's the same thing. It's like if you believe in yourself and if you believe in your work or if you believe the message that you're putting out there, you are selling it in a certain light. And so to be okay with that, to be okay with marketing what you think is valuable, to market to the world what you think it needs, that's an okay. You can still cast nets, but they're not nets meant to catch you and bring you in and chop off your fish heads. They're meant to bring you in as a community, right? They're meant to cast nets to find community, and that's an okay way of doing it and thinking about it, So,
well, I remember a quote somebody once said that said, if you find a product that's free, then you are the product,
right?
because somebody's paying for it, and you're putting yourself into that product. It becomes why they're giving it to you for free. Which, like, a lot of the free stuff, microtransactions, all that. But to step back, as much as people argue over the ideologies of what system will work or what way of human life, the bottom line is I have a kid to feed. I have to put food on the table. I have to pay bills, and I can't just go live in a dumpster, and I don't have a field to crawl in and just sleep. So I want enough to be able to just seclude myself away from the crazy society that has taken over this world and just have a nice little farm or something with some trees to just sit down and write all day. And that's, if I have to go whatever, sell this product or write whatever is trending on yada yada, I have to do what I have to do to for my own survival, because I don't I have a problem with just making sure, like, clothes, food, basic things that people take for granted. And I'm not part of that system that is selling people on new startups or IPs or whatever. Coastal city with their giant skyscrapers, nobody living in them, and the streets just filled with homeless tents and trash bags and stuff. And I don't want any. That's why I moved out here for the first reason, is because like out where I'm living currently, I drive by cornfields, and that is not something that I experienced on the coastal city. You don't have cornfields out there. You don't just find a field of cows randomly next to suburbia. And I don't like the ideological arguments, because people spend so much time tearing each other apart over these hypothetical fantasy concepts of reality, when the base level is that you have to eat and sleep and deal with a very physical reality. And right now the economy is not very good for all that, but all I need to be happy and to sell books is just a quiet place to write and spend time with my family. And I'm not asking for a mansion. I don't want a yacht or anything. I just wish I could get enough people to enjoy the stupid stuff I write.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, I was just going to say that, I think that we're all kind of in that space, whether you're a creative, a writer, an entrepreneur, an artist, that we're all just looking for the freedom to do the things that we love to do. Not necessarily for the sake of the Ferrari and the mansion and the Kardashian lifestyle and what that looks like, but for the sake of having the space to express yourself regularly, to live in your highest joy regularly, and not have to spend so much of your time, giving your 40 hours a week away to someone who is in exchange for such a very, limited ability to support yourself. And so I do think that, again, that's kind of part of what we want to do with this podcast, is to try to create a space, a community where people can have an opportunity to be found, to, meet the people they're supposed to meet, find the audience they're supposed to find. Because I am someone who does absolutely believe that whatever it is that you have to create you would not have the desire to create it if there was not someone out there who needed to receive it. You know,
right. There's a transaction of vibration somewhere where it's, it's coming
absolutely.
out and it's necessary. But, just, same thing. It's like, you have to give yourself grace. And, sometimes that phrase is cliche and cringy to me. And other days I'm like, you know what? All right, I need to like really just lean into that phrase. But I think of like giving yourself grace when it comes to the lifespan that you have, right? It's just, especially being connected globally. I talked to Haleigh about this last time, where it's like you feel like every tragedy and every suffering and conflict is on your shoulders because you know about it, right? And you can't unknow about it, and you can't do anything about it, and so you feel just that that thing. But then you also have to live within your means, and you have to live within the society that you're born into, that you really can't change. You can't go out and just take some land and have the idyllic cabin and grow your own food. You can't. That's not possible for most of us anymore. So within your lifespan, unless the revolution starts tomorrow, in which case, right, I'm always ready for some action. Like, unless we all band together and we change it now, right in my lifespan, in the next 50 years when I'm active, how much can I diminish racism? How much can I do all these things that I would love to do and write and make a difference and make a name for myself. And I've got the highest hopes, right? But again, at the end of the day, you just want to make sure that you are enjoying the day that you have, right? And if you have kiddos, right, enjoying it that you have with your kiddos. And the idea is not to give those 40 hours away, because you only have so many of those hours, and to not give them to something that doesn't care about,
right.
So.
Oh, that's absolutely. Have you ever heard of the Dunbar number?
I don't think so.
So there's I don't know, biologist, psychologist, whatever, who was examining monkey brains. They found that the emotional attachment that biological creatures have is limited inside the brain capacity to a certain number where you can emphasize and not to give it an emotional connection to a certain amount of people, but your brain runs out of capacity past that people. And he came up with the number 150 in his studies, but it's when you reach, you say, you're like, these people next to me are important. I have emotional investment. I care about them. And then once you get past this number, everything out of that is like white static. It's why zombie movies are popular, because you can emphasize with the person next to you. You can't emphasize with a random person across the world because you don't know them and you don't have an emotional connection. And so our brains have this capacity that we reach, and everything out of that starts to be not people. We can't form emotional connection. That's just our software and hardware. The software runs fine, and we come up with all these ideas how we want to be emotionally connected to how many people are there? 8 billion, or we up to 7.5 at this point on the planet.
Yeah.
That's nice to know that I'm just not a shitty person. It's literally how many people I think I can directly help. Within a given area.
The capacity of your brain to consider them as a person and have an emotional connection reaches a limit, and everything else becomes the crowd, and you can't really connect to the crowd. And it's not that you don't want to help them. We want to help all these people, but when we put into our lives a device in our day-to-day functions that feeds us an endless stream of information from all over the planet and theoretically all over the cosmos, means that we are not physically capable of interacting with that without a detriment to our own health. And I think I see transhumanism is the step that's going to come beyond, because everything that came up to people was the evolution of biology and culture and stuff like that. And we think that I love this writer, Daniel Quinn, who goes on about this Ishmael series.
Ishmael. Yes. That's one of my favorite books.
Everybody I talk to, like, I have no idea what that is.
So if you know Mother Culture.
Yes. And he's like, look, we came up to this point. We said, we stopped. This is good enough. This is all it is. There's nothing after that. And we were like, no, biology is going to evolve past that stage to a point where theoretically our Dunbar number increases, where we can create more emotional attachments, where physically we can bypass the body through everything from what I believe will be 3D printed biology genetic things, where you're like, oh, I need a new arm, and you just print a new arm and graft it onto your body, or cybernetics, which everybody's like, the AI revolution and
Mhm.
cyborgs and the fear of technology is scary. So we don't want to go down that road because we've seen enough, Terminator movies.
Terminator. Yeah.
That's not going to go well for anybody. But that step is going to be coming to us whether we want it or not, whether it's a biological mutation sort of thing where we develop psychic children with 6 arms, or whether it's we digitize our I have a pitch for a book. I'm sorry to like rant on because you
Go ahead.
got me woke on a Sunday. I was sleepy at first. I have a book I want to put out called Daniel Was a Rental, about everybody lives inside of a server. They're all digital people and they rent these bodies and they go into them and then they go out into the physical world. And it's going to be like one of those buddy comedies adventures where they get lost in the woods sort of thing. And they like 6 friends hop into a body and they take it into the physical world and they get lost in like hillbilly land.
Oh Lord, that'll be interesting.
But yes, that concept that we can preserve our minds into digital structures it may inevitably come, and society may diverge to the biological mutant people and the people who have all put themselves into, artificial intelligence.
Sorry, go ahead. No,
okay, all right, we're gonna go quick. All right. I'm just glad, Shawn, that you brought up Ishmael. I was going to bring it up earlier if you didn't. For anybody out there, Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. It was one of the books that really opened me up to thinking about stuff differently and mother culture in the way that we do. And I think, especially now, just with the planet so much in disarray and all these things, we are starting to think outside of our own species, which is super important at this phase of the game. So I'll just give you kind of a little click into it. It just so he talks about the jellyfish. So if you would talk to a jellyfish would think that the world started with the jellyfish because that's its own group and species, right? So just like we think as humans, the world started with us, the world is all about us and made for us and whatever else, so we have dominion. That's what every species thinks, right? But we've gotten to a point where as humans, it's now we should be evolved enough and progressed enough to know better, and that we should help all these other things get to the same level eventually, right? Is really that kind of the idea of the book. But it talks about mother culture and all the things that we're programmed with in our own mythology that we don't even think about half the time that we believe. And so anyway, if you haven't yet, read that book. It's just sort of a segue into all these different conversations. So for viewers,
I want to give a shout out to that real quick. The second book of the series, Story of B, has an appendix in the back, was a lecture that the character gives earlier in the book called The Boiling Frog. And you could read by Daniel Quinn's The Boiling Frog lecture is online, and I suggest people read it. And he measures the time of development and the doubling of population. And it halves. It's like 1,000,000 years, we double our population. 500,000 years, we double our population. Then it's 100 years, we double our population. Yep. And it's a very fascinating read into the structures that we take for granted, like the constructs of war, which is politics, or having kings or leaders, or having specialized castes of bakers and bread makers and stuff, and then into the structures of war, the structures of crime, the idea that people need to be housed up in asylums, the idea of crime and stuff like that is very different now than it was 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. And he charts the doubling of population and the different expressions of society reacting to overpopulation areas, which is drugs, crime, escapism, religion, the idea that something will magically save us one day. It's a very fascinating read. I suggest everybody read.
Very cool.
I do like that. Sorry, there's a lot of things going on in my head now just in this conversation. But I do think everything and again, I'm not going to try to be that person who veers into toxic positivity necessarily, but I do think that in the sense of any of those different possibilities, right? Whether you're looking at, humans overpopulating the planet and polluting to the point that we destroy our planet, or getting into that sort of digital consciousness sort of situation, storing your mind or what have you, whatever is whatever you give your attention to is what is going to develop in your reality, right? The things that you give your attention to is what builds what is your reality, essentially. And so I do think that when it comes to all those different concepts, and I think a lot of people go into the fearful, right? Again, as humans, we tend to be very encouched in fear.
Yep.
In the doomsday kind of aspect, and trying, I think that we overthink it a lot.
Yep.
And if you kind of you have to sort of have a little bit of a trust in nature, I guess, essentially, that, yes, a jellyfish is going to think that the world came from jellyfish, but the jellyfish still operates within its own ecosystem, and that balances itself, right? And within humanity, as much as we continue to find ways to increase our population and sort of increase our longevity and our capacities to continue to exist in this physical realm, right? There is always an element of nature balancing itself, right? And I think that we do very much overthink things, and we get so caught up in, we have to fix this, that, or the other, pollution or whatever the global circumstance is. And really, I think what happens is, like, we get so caught up in the noise of what the issues are, right? This is a problem. This is a problem. This is a problem. This is going to end humanity. This is going to destroy our planet. It's war, it's pollution, it's whatever it is. I think that is, again, why people are so looking outside of the mainstream anymore, because it has become so much noise. If you could cut through that noise, someone out there has a brilliant idea for solving all of the problems that are. Someone out, because that is the balance of nature, and we as humans, as the conscious, self-reflective beings that we are, like, we have the capacity to see these problems outside of just the survival mode that the animal kingdom sees them as. We also have the capacity to come up with solutions. Somewhere out there is someone who knows how to build a machine that would offer up free energy, so that we don't have to be continuously paying energy bills, so that we could be more free in our everyday lives to follow our highest passions. Somewhere out there is someone who has an idea for a biofuel so that we're not polluting. There's how many different, startups all over the world that are finding ways to reuse the trash from the oceans to create building materials, new roofing materials, finding ways to use the things that we are considering to be clogging up our dumps or the oceans or whatever, and repurpose them into something that can be useful. It's like, if we would allow ourselves outside of the noise, we would find those voices and those people who have genuine solutions to these problems that are probably a lot more simple and a lot more implementable than we might recognize, because we're so focused on the noise instead of being focused on, no, but there are so many people out there who have these brilliant ideas, and again, just kind of coming back to that, in the realm of functionality, in the realm of sort of the material world of the everyday survival mode kind of things. But I think that there is a parallel to that in the world of creativity that is trying to get through the noise of all the things you're told are supposed to entertain you, or the formula you're supposed to be attached to, right? Into, no, find that thing that you resonate with and connect with. And so, again, not trying to be toxic positivity over here, but there has to be an audience for you. There has to be a way for anything that you're doing, for whatever you're creating is, whether it's writing or music or art or an entrepreneurial business. There's absolutely a place for it. There's room for everyone. There is a reason you have that idea. It's because the balance of nature dictates that there is a space for what you have to help balance out some other issue that there is, whether it's in a functional system in terms of like the pollution and that kind of thing, or whether it is in the creative realm and the sort of energetic, imaginative needs that people have, right? So I think that
there's a fear paralysis, within the catastrophe of it all. But you're right, Haleigh. It's like, good news and bad news, right? You're special and you're not special, in the sense of, like, if you feel some way, you're not the only one.
Right.
And that whole share, and whether it comes to the planet or whether it comes to writing, it's like, if you if the majority of people think like this, the majority of the time, like, things innovate, things grow. And that's essentially also what we're doing as writers. It's like, okay, the more I think about this, the more I will innovate and create towards that end. And the more people will group together that are like-minded.
And you can't know that
Yeah.
your story won't be the thing that triggers that inventor person to think of how they're going to fix a problem. Like,
Yep.
it all integrates together. It all connects together, right? That's the nature of it. And so somewhere out there could be someone who has a brilliant idea hiding in their brain that if they read your book and they the ridiculousness of your story, something in it would trigger them to say, here's a solution to this problem that humanity has that's so brilliant and so simple and so easy, and we could absolutely do it. And again, if we could just cut through the noise, if we could just to hear those voices, I really do think that there is a multiverse reality we can tune into where things are more harmonious, and we do have that space to follow our highest passion and be not in the survival mode, but in the thriving mode.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. I think that positivity, I would rather take toxic positivity in the face of this infinite, abysmal, nihilistic despair that has been thrust upon us. But I do want to put a caveat on that. And that is, there's a great line from Half-Life 2 back in the day, which is unintended consequences. And that's the monkey paw solution, that everything seems like a good forward idea can lead to synergistic problems that you are not accounting for. So we always have to be careful in our steps forward, but I think we do need to be taking more positive steps forward.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be some kind of a wrench thrown into the works at some point, right? But again, going back to just the idea of mindset, you can either focus on the wrench that's in the works, or you can focus on, well, there has to be a way to fix it. And
always focus on the fix.
Yeah. And it's like, I think that if you have a mindset of focusing on, again, just the idea that, well, there has to be an audience for me if I have this internal desire to create, that means that there has to be a counterpoint, right? Any magnet has two sides, the north and south. You can cut it in half, and that other half is going to become the opposite end of the magnet again. You can't, there is no one-sided coin. It doesn't work that way. So, whatever it is that you are creating as a creative person, there has to be the flip side of it, the market for it. It has to be there. It has to exist. And, if we can do anything to help to get that market, to get you out there, we're certainly trying to do it for ourselves. And we're certainly trying to create a community where there's you can connect to the right people and find the right voices and find the right tools and resources, because they are available. Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I just want to tell stories about silly little guys.
Yeah.
I love it, but so do I. I just want to tell my silly little stories too. But again, those silly little stories could be the inspiration for the next Albert Einstein, or who knows.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Well, I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I can certainly wrap things up here. Shawn, certainly appreciate you joining us for the podcast, especially.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you.
So again, plug your upcoming book and where people can find you, and just give a little wrap up. We'll certainly have all your links. Do send them to me. We'll share them in the description of the episode. But just a final, where can everybody find you and all of your work?
Me or
you?
Yes.
Yeah. No, you said Shane. I was like, yeah, what's Shane writing?
No, sorry. We already did. He's got his own episode. We already did that.
I'm old news.
Yeah. No, sorry, Shane, Shawn. A little bit of
my buddy, which I don't want to disparage. I totally love the guy. He's great. It's just money is just not his area of expertise. Puts his stuff out at As If Productions.
Okay.
I don't know if that's I have to look that up. I feel bad plugging it and then not knowing the actual direction.
Oh no, that's all right. You can just send it to us. We'll put the link in the description for people to find. Do you have your stuff also listed on Amazon as like ebooks and?
Oh yes. I am SL Koch is what I go under there, and I usually shorten it to SLK because it just looks better aesthetically. Mm-hmm. So SL Koch is on Amazon. I have whatever's releaser. I give you I thought I gave you a collection of my short stories.
You did. Liquid Hitler.
And you totally, oh no, that's the novella. That's the
no. Okay, yeah.
But yeah, let's not do another hour of me explaining that book.
We'll have you on for another episode another time. We can talk about it.
I gotta give you the shorts. I have my Fragments Volume 1, which is 13 short stories, which are all absolutely more ridiculous than the last. And then next we'll be putting out Undredgeable, well, hopefully next month.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, we will definitely, again, send me whatever the links that you have for people to be able to find you. We'll put that in the description. And, obviously, certainly hope that we can help build your audience, because that's a part of what we're here to do is build a community of creators, because, again, the resources are out there and the audience is out there. It's just a matter of getting all the pieces together for the puzzle.
Yeah. Before I forget, Shawn, what does your what does the L stand for? Because I sign SL Fisher. So
I was just gonna say, it's gonna love that little synchronicity there.
Yeah.
So my full name is technically Shawn Lee Edward Koch.
Okay.
But SLEK spells Slack, and I don't want to go by Slack, so I cut it down to SLK. But when I write a children's book, I'm gonna go under Lee Edwards, so that's just
very fun.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. That's just Lee, which is my great uncle or whatever.
Okay, gotcha. Mine's Lawrence, so
I love it. It's a fun little the SLs. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back then for another check-in podcast at some point where we can have another wonderful conversation about all the
1,000 of these.
I'm sure. And don't worry, when we have a need for content, we're going to definitely mine you. So be prepared.
I'm an information sponge, and I spent my entire life just absorbing everything I can get from everything. So there's a lot of stuff in here.
All right. Well, we'll keep you. You'll be definitely one of our back burner kind of. Hey, we need some content. Jump on our podcast with us. Help us out.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Shawn, for being here. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you too.
Hi, friends. Thank you so much for joining us for that conversation with our fellow author, Shawn Koch. Again, he's got a new book out, Undredgeable. We do have the links in the description for his books that he has available. If you want to find Shane and I, you can follow us at No Small Stories Podcast on Instagram. We do also have a Patreon if you'd like to support more episodes like this and more conversations with creatives, entrepreneurs, and people who are otherwise trying to think and live outside of the box. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/no small stories. You can also find me on Instagram at h.overseth, and you can find Shane at ink.nell. I do also have a fictional podcast, The Adventures of Abernathy Franklin. You can find that wherever you're listening to this podcast. We thank you so much again for joining us. We do hope you'll tune in next time when we'll be talking about the fictional podcast that I write. If you are an artist, an entrepreneur, a creative, or someone who would love to have conversations with us about what it is to be a creative person in this world today, do contact us at nosmallstories@gmail.com. Or if you just want to send us a little note with feedback or to say hi, we're happy to meet new friends. Thanks all for listening. And remember, no matter how small you may start, your story is always a big deal to us. Thanks and take care.